Across the weathered plains of the frontier, a starving Apache named Peter wandered alone. His people gone, his stomach empty, his hope as barren as the drought-stricken land. Then came the strange sound, childish laughter where no child should be. Following it deep into the ancient forest, he discovered an impossible sight. A giant little girl named Gwen, hanging upside down from a massive oak, her dress billowing like a cloud, her smile defying her predicament. Though twice his size, her eyes held no fear, only wonder and a peculiar knowing. What secret could this child possess that would forever alter the course of a broken man's destiny? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The harsh morning sun beat down on Peter's gaunt face as he trudged across the barren flats. 3 days without food had left his steps unsteady, his once proud shoulders now hunched against the weight of hunger. He reached for the small leather pouch hanging from his neck, the last connection to his people, now all gone. "Grandfather," he whispered to the empty sky, "your medicine offers no protection against starvation." A distant memory surfaced, his mother's gentle hands teaching him which plants could sustain life, even in the driest seasons. But this drought had claimed even those hardy survivors. The land had betrayed them all. Peter paused at the ridge overlooking what was once the summer hunting grounds of his tribe. Before the sickness came, before the white settlers pushed them from the fertile valley, before he became the last one to carry the stories of his people. He untied his medicine pouch, fingers tracing the intricate beadwork his mother had sewn when he became a man. Inside lay a small bundle of sage, now brittle and faded. A smooth riverstone, his father claimed, held the spirit of the bear, and a single black braid, his mother's hair, cut before fever took her 2 winters ago. "What use is remembering," he muttered, "when memory cannot fill an empty belly?" The forbidden forest loomed ahead, its ancient trees standing defiant against the drought. The elders had warned never to enter its shadows. Spirits dwelled there, they said, neither good nor evil, but unknowable to man. Peter had once believed such tales. Now, with death stalking him like a patient wolf, the forest offered the only hope for game. His cracked lips formed a bitter smile. What spirit would want this skin and bones anyway? As he approached the tree line, a cool breath seemed to escape from between the trunks. Peter hesitated, one hand clutching his medicine pouch. The teaching said to speak to the forest before entering, to announce oneself to whatever dwelled within. "I am Peter, son of Tall Feather," he said, voice catching on his father's name. "I come seeking food, nothing more." Only silence answered, yet something shifted in the air like the moment before summer rain. Peter squared his shoulders and stepped into the shadows, leaving the harsh sun behind. The temperature dropped immediately, and his parched skin welcomed the change. His hunter's eyes scanned the forest floor for tracks, but found only undisturbed earth. Strange, he thought. Even in drought, creatures would seek the shelter of these trees. As he moved deeper, the forest grew denser, the light filtering through the canopy taking on an odd greenish hue. His stomach cramped sharply, a reminder of its emptiness. Peter leaned against a broad trunk, breathing deeply to master the pain. That's when he heard it. Laughter. A child's laughter, light and musical, coming from somewhere ahead. Peter froze. No settlements existed this deep in the forest. No tribe would allow their children to wander these spirit-haunted woods alone. "Hello?" he called, his voice sounding thin among the massive trees. The laughter came again, followed by what sounded like a girl's voice, though he couldn't make out the words. Against all caution, Peter moved toward the sound, drawn by curiosity stronger than fear. The trees opened into a small clearing, and there Peter saw something that made him doubt his starving mind. Hanging upside down from the highest branch of an enormous oak was a little girl, except she wasn't little at all. Though childlike in proportion, she appeared to be twice his size, her long hair nearly touching the ground, despite being suspended at least 20 feet up. Peter's hand clutched his medicine pouch as the impossible child looked directly at him and smiled. "Finally," she said, her voice strangely accented, but understandable. "I've been waiting for someone brave enough to hear me." Peter stumbled backward, nearly falling over a gnarled root. The giant child, suspended impossibly from the ancient oak, giggled at his reaction, the sound echoing through the clearing like wind chimes. "You look like you've seen a spirit," she said, her smile revealing teeth as white as river stones. Peter's hand remained fixed on his medicine pouch. "What are you?" he managed, his parched throat making the words rasp. The girl twisted slightly in her suspended position, her long golden hair swaying like a curtain. Around her neck hung a crystal pendant that caught the dappled lendl, sending prismatic colors dancing across the forest floor. "I'm Gwen," she answered simply, as if her existence were the most natural thing in the world. "And you're the first person to hear me in." She paused, considering, a very long time. Peter circled cautiously, keeping his distance. The girl was proportioned like a child of perhaps 8 summers, yet she was massive. Her outstretched hand could easily encompass his entire head. Her dress seemed woven from material he couldn't identify, something between silk and morning mist. "How did you come to be up there?" Peter asked, gesturing toward the branch from which she dangled by her knees. Gwen's smile faltered. "I was careless. The crossing isn't always stable, and sometimes," she made a tumbling motion with her hands, "things go sideways. Or in my case, upside down." Peter didn't understand half of what she said, but hunger and curiosity kept him rooted to the spot. "Crossing?" The crystal at her throat pulsed once, emitting a soft blue glow. "From my home to yours. Though I didn't expect to get stuck." She attempted to pull herself up to reach the branch, but her position made it impossible. "I've been hanging here since yesterday's sunset." "That's not possible," Peter said. "I would have heard your calls. Only those with open hearts can hear me," Gwen replied, her eyes a startling shade of violet, studying him intently. "Your hunger opened something in you that most adults close off." Peter's stomach cramped painfully, as if acknowledging her words. "You speak strangely for a child, and you see strangely for a grown man," she countered. Most would have run by now. The crystal pendant swung hypnotically as she shifted position again. Peter noticed how the forest seemed to bend slightly toward it, leaves angling in its direction, shadows retreating from its subtle light. "I need help," Gwen said plainly, "and you need food." She nodded toward a small satchel that had fallen to the ground beneath her. "There's enough in there to fill your belly for days." Peter approached cautiously and nudged the satchel with his foot. It fell open, revealing strange fruits, some blue as the deepest sky, others golden, like the sun, and what appeared to be bread wrapped in large leaves. His mouth watered, but suspicion held him back. "What do you want from me?" Gwen's expression grew serious, the playfulness vanishing. "First, help me down. Then I'll explain everything." Peter examined the tree. The lowest branches were well beyond his reach, and the trunk was too wide to climb easily. "How am I supposed to help? You're twice my size and 20 feet up." Gwen's pendant glowed brighter as the forest shadows lengthened. "There's a vine on the other side of the clearing, strong enough to use as a rope. If you can throw it over my branch, I can use it to pull myself up and climb down." Peter hesitated, years of tribal warnings about forest spirits echoing in his mind. Yet as he looked at Gwen, at her hopeful expression and the strange gentle light emanating from her crystal, he found himself nodding. "If this is a trick," he said, backing toward the edge of the clearing, "may my ancestors forgive me for my foolishness." "It's no trick," Gwen called after him, "but it is the beginning of something much bigger than either of us." Her pendant flashed once more, illuminating her face from below. "And Peter, thank you for hearing me when no one else could." He paused, realizing he had never told her his name. The vine was heavier than Peter expected, its surface rough against his calloused palms. He dragged it from the edge of the clearing, muscles straining under the weight of his own hunger. "You'll need to throw it higher," Gwen called, watching his preparations with an eager expression. Just over that branch I'm hanging from. Peter wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. I know how to throw a rope, he muttered, though the task before him seemed nearly impossible. The branch was a good 30 feet up, and his strength was failing. He coiled the vine carefully, the movements bringing back memories of hunting with his father, preparing lassos for deer, setting snares for rabbit. His weathered knife came out of its sheath at his belt, its blade catching the afternoon light. With practiced motions, he cut a length of vine and fashioned a crude weight at one end. "What's that?" Gwen asked, eyes fixed on the knife. "My father gave it to me when I was a boy," Peter replied. Not looking up from his work, said a man is only as good as the edge he keeps. He tested the blade against his thumb. Not much left of it now. The knife had seen him through 7 winters alone. It had skinned game, cut wood, dug roots, and more than once defended his life. Like him, it had grown thinner with time, worn down by constant use and necessity. With the weighted end prepared, Peter positioned himself beneath the branch and began to swing the vine in a wide arc. His first throw fell short, the vine slapping against the trunk before tumbling back to earth. The second attempt hooked briefly, before slipping. "Try again," Gwen encouraged. "You're getting closer." Peter's arms trembled with fatigue, but he gathered the vine once more. This time, he closed his eyes briefly, remembering how his father had taught him to feel the throw before making it. The vine sailed upward, arcing perfectly over the branch and dangling within Gwen's reach. Her face lit up as her fingers stretched toward it. Just a little more, she strained, the branch creaking ominously beneath her weight. Peter tugged the vine, maneuvering it closer until her hands closed around it. What happened next defied everything he thought possible. With strength that seemed impossible for her childlike frame, giant though she was, Gwen pulled herself upright, her body moving with uncanny grace despite her size. For a moment she balanced perfectly atop the branch, her crystal pendant swinging free and catching the light. Then, using the vine as a guide, she began to descend. Peter stepped back, suddenly aware of how truly massive she was. Standing before him minutes later, Gwen towered nearly twice his height, yet her movements had the delicacy of a sparrow. "Thank you," she said, kneeling to bring herself closer to his eye level. Even so, she loomed over him. An unusual scent surrounded her, like rain and wild flowers, and something else Peter couldn't identify. Not unpleasant, but definitely not of his world. "Your knife," she observed, pointing to where it rested in his hand. "It's seen much hardship." Peter sheathed it defensively. "It serves its purpose. Among my people, tools tell the story of their owner." Gwen said, "Yours speaks of survival at great cost." Her words struck uncomfortably close to truth. Peter turned away, moving toward the fallen satchel of food. "You promised me a meal, and answers," Gwen added, reaching the satchel before him with one long stride. She opened it, revealing the strange fruits and bread he'd glimpsed earlier. "But first, you must eat. Questions are better answered on a full stomach." Peter hesitated only briefly before accepting a piece of the golden fruit she offered. Its flesh was firm, unlike anything he'd tasted before. Sweet, but with an undercurrent of something almost spicy. Energy seemed to flow into his limbs with each bite, the gnawing emptiness in his belly retreating for the first time in days. "This isn't like any fruit I know," he said between mouthfuls. Gwen smiled, settling herself cross-legged on the forest floor. "That's because it doesn't grow in your world, Peter." Her crystal pendant pulsed once, illuminating her serious expression. "It grows in mine. Your world." Peter stopped mid-bite, the strange fruit suddenly feeling foreign in his mouth. "What do you mean, your world?" Gwen reached into her satchel and withdrew a smooth, flat stone about the size of Peter's palm. Strange symbols had been etched into its surface, symbols that seemed to shift slightly when he wasn't looking directly at them. "We call this a boundary stone," she explained, holding it reverently. "It helps us find the places where the veil between worlds grows thin." She placed it on the ground between them. "Your people have stories about such places, don't they?" sacred spots where spirits walk freely. Peter nodded reluctantly. The elders spoke of doorways to the spirit world. His gaze drifted to the massive oak tree. They warned us never to enter this forest. With good reason, Gwen said, her voice softening. Not all who cross from my side come with peaceful intentions. Her finger traced one of the symbols on the stone. We're not spirits, though. We're as flesh and blood as you, just differently shaped by our world. The stone began to emit a faint humming sound, and the symbols glowed with a pale blue light that matched Gwen's pendant. Peter instinctively reached for his knife. It won't harm you, Gwen assured him. It's searching for what? The nearest crossing point. Her violet eyes studied him carefully. Peter, my people call themselves the Guardians. For centuries we've protected the boundaries between our worlds, keeping balance. She gestured to the forest around them. Your drought, the sickness that took your tribe, these are symptoms of a growing imbalance. Peter's jaw tightened. You expect me to believe your people could have prevented the death of mine? Not prevented, Gwen said gently, but perhaps less. The balance has been failing for generations, and fewer of us can cross safely anymore. She held up the boundary stone, which now pulsed steadily. That's why I came, to find someone who could help restore what's been broken. And you believe that's me? Peter laughed bitterly. A starving Apache with nothing but a worn knife and empty memories? Gwen's expression remained serious. The stone led me to this forest, to this tree, and then you came, able to hear me when no one else could for days. She leaned forward, her massive face now closer to his. That's not coincidence, Peter. The boundary stone suddenly flared brightly, illuminating the clearing. Peter shielded his eyes, and when he lowered his hand, he gasped. At the base of the oak tree, a seam of blue light had appeared, outlining what looked like a doorway in the massive trunk. Is that a crossing point? Gwen confirmed, rising to her feet. And it's opening wider than I've ever seen. Her expression changed to one of concern. Something's wrong. It shouldn't be this active. She moved toward the glowing doorway, the boundary stone clutched in her hand. As she approached, the light intensified, casting long shadows across the clearing. Peter followed cautiously, drawn by curiosity stronger than fear. My people believe your world and mine once were one, Gwen explained, placing her free hand against the glowing outline, that a great cataclysm split them apart, leaving only these thin places to connect them. Peter stood beside her, feeling small next to her towering form. And what happens if someone crosses? For my kind, we maintain our form but can be heard only by those with open hearts. She glanced down at him. For your kind, it's more dangerous. Few humans have crossed and returned unchanged. The blue light pulsed rhythmically now, like a heartbeat. Peter could feel a strange pressure in the air, as if a storm approached. Why show me this? She asked, unable to look away from the glowing doorway. Gwen knelt beside him, the boundary stone held between them. Because something is coming through that shouldn't be. Her voice had lost its childlike quality, now resonating with authority beyond her apparent years. And I can't stop it alone. As if summoned by her words, a dark shadow appeared behind the blue light, moving toward the doorway from the other side. Get back! Gwen pushed Peter behind her massive form as the shadow beyond the doorway grew more distinct. The air crackled with energy, raising the hair on Peter's arms. The glowing blue outline in the tree trunk pulsed erratically now, widening and contracting like a wound trying to heal itself. What is that? Peter asked, hand instinctively moving to his knife, though he knew it would offer little protection against whatever was approaching. A seeker, Gwen whispered, her childlike face hardening with determination. They hunt for weak points between worlds. For years they've only been able to reach partially through, but this one, she trailed off as a dark, clawed hand emerged from the light. The hand was followed by an arm covered in what looked like black scales, then a misshapen shoulder. Peter froze as a head pushed through. Not human, not animal, but something between. Its eyes were vertical slits of deep purple, and its mouth was filled with needle-like teeth. Guardian, the creature hissed, its voice like stones grinding together. How convenient to find you already here. Gwen stood her ground. You have no right to cross, Seeker. Return to your side. The creature laughed, a sound that made Peter's stomach clench. The old rules are dying, little guardian. The balance your kind protected for so long is failing. More of its body emerged, a torso covered in the same black scales, another arm ending in curved talons. Peter, Gwen said without turning, run, but Peter couldn't move, transfixed by the horror unfolding before him. The creature fully emerged now, standing slightly taller than even Gwen. In one clawed hand, it held a jagged black crystal that seemed to drink in the surrounding light. A human? The Seeker's head tilted curiously toward Peter. How interesting. I haven't tasted human essence in centuries. Gwen stepped forward, her pendant glowing brightly. You will not touch him. Such protectiveness, the Seeker mocked. Does the Council know you've been making friends on this side? It raised the black crystal, which began to emit a low, pulsing hum. No matter. You can both die together. With shocking speed, the creature lunged forward. Gwen countered with surprising agility for her size, blocking its path to Peter. Their collision shook the ground, sending Peter stumbling backward. He watched in horror as they grappled, Gwen's light-filled pendant clashing against the Seeker's dark crystal. The stone, Gwen called to him, struggling against the creature's strength. Take the boundary stone and close the doorway. Peter spotted the stone where Gwen had dropped it. He dove for it, feeling its strange energy vibrate against his palm as he scooped it up. But what was he supposed to do with it? The Seeker noticed his movement and snarled, one arm breaking free from Gwen's grip to swipe at Peter. He ducked just in time, feeling the rush of air as talons passed inches from his head. Place it against the doorway, Gwen instructed, renewing her efforts to restrain the creature. Think of endings, of doors closing, of boundaries restored. Peter scrambled toward the glowing outline in the tree, the boundary stone growing warmer in his hand. Behind him, he heard the sounds of fierce struggle, Gwen's determined grunts, the Seeker's inhuman snarls. Reaching the tree, Peter pressed the stone against the pulsing light. Nothing happened. You have to believe it will work, Gwen called, her voice strained. Your intent shapes its power. Peter closed his eyes, trying to focus despite the chaos behind him. He thought of his tribe's teachings about boundaries and respect, of thresholds that should not be crossed without permission. He felt the stone grow hot against his palm. A scream of rage from the Seeker made him turn. The creature had broken free from Gwen and was charging toward him. The black crystal, the shadow shard, extended before it like a weapon. Peter, Gwen cried out in warning, but she was too far to intercept. In that moment of pure terror, Peter's will crystallized. The boundary stone flared with brilliant light, and the doorway began to contract rapidly. The Seeker howled in fury as it was caught in the narrowing opening, its body partially pulled back through. This isn't over, Guardian. It snarled, struggling against the closing portal, its eyes fixed on Peter with malevolent promise. And you, human, you've chosen the wrong side of a war you don't understand. With a final flash of light, the doorway sealed shut, cutting off the creature's last words. The shadow shard, however, had fallen to the forest floor on their side of the boundary. Get back, Gwen pushed Peter behind her massive form, as the shadow beyond the doorway grew more distinct. The air crackled with energy, raising the hair on Peter's arms. The glowing blue outline in the tree trunk pulsed erratically now, widening and contracting like a wound, trying to heal itself. What is that? Peter asked, hand instinctively moving to his knife, though he knew it would offer little protection against whatever was approaching. A Seeker, Gwen whispered, her childlike face hardening with determination. They hunt for weak points between worlds. For years they've only been able to reach partially through, but this one, she trailed off as a dark, clawed hand emerged from the light. The hand was followed by an arm covered in what looked like black scales, then a misshapen shoulder. Peter froze as a head pushed through, not human, not animal, but something between. Its eyes were vertical slits of deep purple, and its mouth was filled with needle-like teeth. Guardian, the creature hissed, its voice like stones grinding together. "How convenient to find you already here." Gwen stood her ground. "You have no right to cross, Seeker. Return to your side." The creature laughed, a sound that made Peter's stomach clench. "The old rules are dying, little guardian. The balance your kind protected for so long is failing." More of its body emerged, a torso covered in the same black scales, another arm ending in curved talons. "Peter," Gwen said without turning, "run." But Peter couldn't move, transfixed by the horror unfolding before him. The creature fully emerged now, standing slightly taller than even Gwen. In one clawed hand, it held a jagged black crystal that seemed to drink in the surrounding light. A human. The Seeker's head tilted curiously toward Peter. "How interesting. I haven't tasted human essence in centuries." Gwen stepped forward, her pendant glowing brightly. "You will not touch him." "Such protectiveness," the Seeker mocked. "Does the Council know you've been making friends on this side?" It raised the black crystal, which began to emit a low, pulsing hum. "No matter, you can both die together." With shocking speed, the creature lunged forward. Gwen countered with surprising agility for her size, blocking its path to Peter. Their collision shook the ground, sending Peter stumbling backward. He watched in horror as they grappled, Gwen's light-filled pendant clashing against the Seeker's dark crystal. "The stone," Gwen called to him, struggling against the creature's strength. "Take the boundary stone and close the doorway." Peter spotted the stone where Gwen had dropped it. He dove for it, feeling its strange energy vibrate against his palm as he scooped it up. But what was he supposed to do with it? The Seeker noticed his movement and snarled, one arm breaking free from Gwen's grip to swipe at Peter. He ducked just in time, feeling the rush of air as talons passed inches from his head. "Place it against the doorway," Gwen instructed, renewing her efforts to restrain the creature. "Think of endings, of doors closing, of boundaries restored." Peter scrambled toward the glowing outline in the tree, the boundary stone growing warmer in his hand. Behind him, he heard the sounds of fierce struggle, Gwen's determined grunts, the Seeker's inhuman snarls. Reaching the tree, Peter pressed the stone against the pulsing light. Nothing happened. "You have to believe it will work," Gwen called, her voice strained. "Your intent shapes its power." Peter closed his eyes, trying to focus despite the chaos behind him. He thought of his tribe's teachings about boundaries and respect, of thresholds that should not be crossed without permission. He felt the stone grow hot against his palm. A scream of rage from the Seeker made him turn. The creature had broken free from Gwen and was charging toward him. The black crystal, the shadow shard, extended before it like a weapon. "Peter!" Gwen cried out in warning, but she was too far to intercept. In that moment of pure terror, Peter's will crystallized. The boundary stone flared with brilliant light, and the doorway began to contract rapidly. The Seeker howled in fury as it was caught in the narrowing opening, its body partially pulled back through. "This isn't over, Guardian," it snarled, struggling against the closing portal, its eyes fixed on Peter with malevolent promise. "And you, human, you've chosen the wrong side of a war you don't understand." With a final flash of light, the doorway sealed shut, cutting off the creature's last words. The shadow shard, however, had fallen to the forest floor on their side of the boundary. The forest fell unnaturally silent after the doorway closed. Peter stood frozen, the boundary stone still warm in his palm, his heart hammering against his ribs. The encounter had lasted mere minutes, yet everything had changed. Gwen approached slowly, her movements stiff. A thin line of golden liquid blood trickled from a cut on her forearm where the Seeker's talons had struck. "You did well," she said, kneeling beside him. "Few humans could have closed a crossing point on their first attempt." Peter's gaze fixed on the shadow shard lying on the forest floor. Even without touching it, he could sense its malevolence, a cold, hungry presence that seemed to pull at something deep inside him. "Don't look at it too long," Gwen warned, covering the shard with a cloth from her satchel. "It feeds on attention and doubt." What was that thing? Peter asked, finally finding his voice. A seeker. They serve the Void Lord's beings that exist in the spaces between our worlds. Gwen winced as she bound her wounded arm. They believe the boundaries should be destroyed, all realms merged into one they can rule. Peter struggled to comprehend the scale of what she described. Just hours ago, his greatest concern had been finding his next meal. Now he was caught in a conflict between worlds. Why me? He asked. Of all people, why did I hear you when others couldn't? Gwen reached for her satchel and withdrew something that gleamed silver in the fading light. A bracelet woven of fine metallic threads that seemed to move slightly as though alive. This is a guardian's bracelet, she explained. Every guardian receives one when they complete their training. She held it toward him. It chooses those with the ability to sense the boundaries. Peter backed away. I'm not one of your guardians. No, Gwen agreed, but you have the gift. The bracelet will help you control it, help you understand what you're sensing. Her violet eyes held his. Without it, the connection you've awakened today will grow uncontrolled. You'll be drawn to every crossing point, feel every disturbance. It would drive you mad eventually. Peter looked from the bracelet to Gwen's earnest face. If I take it, it will focus your ability, allow you to sense crossings only when you choose to. She paused. And it will mark you as under my protection when we cross to my world. Cross, Peter shook his head firmly. I'm not going anywhere. I helped you, you fed me. Our agreement is complete. Gwen's expression grew somber. The Seeker saw you, Peter. It knows you helped me close the doorway. She nodded toward the cloth-covered shadow shard. And now its shard remains here, a beacon calling others of its kind. They will come for you, whether or not you choose to help me further. Peter felt cold dread settle in his stomach. Then I'll go far from here. The desert is vast. They can track you anywhere now that they've seen you. Gwen held the bracelet out again. But in my world, we can protect you while we find a way to neutralize the shard. Peter stared at the silver band. Taking it would mean accepting everything Gwen had told him, committing to a path he couldn't possibly understand. Yet refusing meant facing the Seekers alone. There's more, isn't there? He asked, studying her face. Something you're not telling me. Gwen hesitated, then nodded. The elders of my people have a prophecy about a human who would help us restore the failing boundaries. When the boundary stone led me here, I thought... She trailed off. You thought I was this prophesied human. Peter finished for her. I still do. She looked at him steadily. But prophecy or not, you're in danger now, and my world is the only place you'll be safe. Peter thought of the empty plains that had been his home, the lonely existence he'd endured since his tribe's passing. What was there to keep him here? Yet the thought of stepping into an unknown world filled him with terror. The bracelet caught the last rays of sunlight filtering through the canopy, sending prismatic reflections across Gwen's face. Slowly, reluctantly, Peter extended his hand. I'll go with you, he said, as the bracelet settled around his wrist, automatically adjusting to fit perfectly. But once the danger has passed, I return to my world. Agreed, Gwen said solemnly. The bracelet warmed against his skin, then began to glow with a soft silver light. Immediately Peter felt a change, as if a door had opened in his mind, revealing senses he never knew he possessed. I can feel it, he whispered in awe. The forest, it's full of thin places. Gwen nodded, relief evident in her expression. And now we need to find the strongest one before night falls. The crossing will be harder for you than it was for me. She carefully rewrapped the shadow shard and placed it deep in her satchel. Are you ready, Peter? He wasn't, not truly tall, but as the bracelet pulsed gently against his wrist, he nodded anyway. The forest grew darker as Peter and Gwen moved deeper among the ancient trees. The Guardian's bracelet on Peter's wrist pulsed with increasing frequency, guiding them forward like a divining rod, seeking water. It's responding to your instincts, Gwen explained as they navigated around a massive, fallen trunk. Trust what you feel. Peter concentrated on the subtle pull that seemed to tug him slightly left. "There's something stronger this way," he said, changing direction toward a dense thicket of thorny bushes. Gwen followed, her large form somehow moving through the undergrowth without disturbing it. The strongest crossings often hide in plain sight, protected by natural barriers. They pushed through the thicket into a small grotto Peter never would have found on his own. A spring bubbled up from between moss-covered stones, forming a perfectly circular pool. The water's surface reflected the darkening sky above, yet somehow seemed deeper than possible. "A water crossing," Gwen murmured with approval. "These are stable." She reached into her satchel and withdrew an oval object wrapped in soft leather. Unwrapping it revealed a handheld mirror, unlike any Peter had seen. Its frame was an intricate weave of copper and silver wires, and its surface had an unusual depth, as if looking into twilight rather than reflecting the surroundings. "A crossing mirror," Gwen said, holding it reverently. "It shows what lies on the other side of a boundary." She held the mirror over the pool. Its surface rippled with blue light, then cleared to show an image that made Peter gasp. Instead of reflecting the forest canopy above, it displayed a vast meadow under a strange purple sky, with distant crystalline structures that might have been buildings. "Your world?" Peter asked, leaning closer. Gwen nodded. "One small corner of it. Each crossing connects to a specific location on the other side." She angled the mirror so he could see better. "This one leads to the western meadows, not far from my village." Peter studied the alien landscape with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. "How do we cross?" "Water crossings require complete immersion," Gwen explained, returning the mirror to her satchel. "We must enter the pool together. I'll guide you through." Peter eyed the small pool skeptically. "It doesn't look deep enough to immerse even me, let alone you. Appearances are deceiving at crossing points." Gwen's voice grew serious. "There are things you should know before we proceed. The journey will be disorienting. You'll feel pressure, cold, perhaps even fear. Whatever happens, you must keep hold of my hand. If we separate during crossing, you could be lost between worlds." Peter swallowed hard. "Lost? There are spaces between worlds where neither time nor physical laws operate as we understand them." Her expression darkened. "Those lost in the between rarely find their way out." The bracelet on Peter's wrist pulsed more urgently now, almost in response to his rising anxiety. "One more thing," Gwen added. "In my world, proportions will be reversed. I'll appear normal size to myself, which means you'll perceive me as even larger, and you'll appear quite small to our people." Peter frowned. "So I'll be like a child among giants? More like a small animal," Gwen said gently. "But the council has ways to help visitors adjust." This revelation did nothing to ease Peter's concerns, but the memory of the Seeker's malevolent promise kept him from backing out. Better to face the unknown than wait for certain death. "The mirror," he said suddenly. "May I see it once more?" Gwen seemed surprised but handed him the crossing mirror. Peter gazed into its depth, seeing not just the strange landscape, but also several figures moving about. Gwen's people, he presumed. They appeared to be preparing for something, gathering in a circle around the apparent exit point of the crossing. "They're expecting us," he realized. "I sent a signal when we defeated the Seeker," Gwen confirmed. "The council will want to speak with you immediately." Peter returned the mirror, his resolve hardening. "Then let's not keep them waiting." Gwen extended her hand, massive compared to his, and Peter took it, feeling the strange texture of her skin, smoother than human, but with an underlying firmness like young tree bark. Together they stepped to the edge of the pool. The water's surface seemed to pulse in rhythm with Peter's bracelet, creating concentric rings that spread outward. "Deep breath," Gwen instructed. "And remember, don't let go, no matter what you experience." Peter nodded, filling his lungs with the cool forest air. It might be the last breath of his world he would take for some time. As one, they stepped forward into the pool. The water rose instantly, impossibly engulfing them both, despite the pool's small size. Peter felt a plunging sensation, as if falling through the center of the earth itself, Gwen's hand the only anchor in a swirling vortex of sensation. The last thing he saw before the waters closed over his head was the crossing mirror floating above the surface, showing his world, a world he might never see again. Cold, pressure, darkness, then a cacophony of sensations too alien to name. Peter tumbled through what felt like endless space, his body simultaneously stretched and compressed. Only Gwen's grip, firm and unwavering, kept panic from consuming him completely. Just as he thought his lungs would burst, they broke through to air and light. He gasped, blinking against the sudden brightness. They stood in the center of a shallow pool much like the one they'd entered, except everything else had changed. The sky above was a deep lavender color, with 2 small moons visible despite the daylight. Surrounding the pool was a circle of standing stones carved with symbols similar to those on the boundary stone. And there were people, enormous people. Just as Gwen had warned, the proportions had reversed dramatically. What had been a size difference of roughly double in his world had become something far more extreme. Peter now stood barely taller than the ankles of the gathered crowd. "Guardian Gwen returns," announced a deep voice that seemed to vibrate the very air. "And she brings the human." Peter instinctively pressed closer to Gwen, who had indeed returned to what must be her normal proportions, towering above him like a living mountain. She still appeared as a young girl in features, but her scale made that childlike appearance all the more disconcerting. "Elders of the council," Gwen addressed the largest figures at the front of the crowd. "I present Peter of the Apache, who aided me against a seeker and closed a compromised boundary." The murmuring that followed made Peter's ears hurt, their voices too deep and resonant for comfort at this scale. He fought against the instinct to cover his ears. One of the elders, an ancient-looking man with a beard that fell past his knees, stepped forward. "The human appears distressed. Bring forth the equalizer." A younger guardian approached, carrying a golden disc about the size of a wagon wheel. From Peter's perspective, intricate mechanisms whirred and clicked within its circular frame, and at its center sat a crystal similar to the one in Gwen's pendant. "The scale equalizer," Gwen explained, kneeling to address Peter more directly. "It won't change your actual size, but it will adjust your perception and physical experience of our world. You'll feel more proportionate." Peter eyed the device warily. "Is it safe?" "It's been used for human visitors before, though not for many generations." She offered what was meant to be a reassuring smile. "The alternative is to experience our world at this scale, which few humans can tolerate for long." Given that option, Peter nodded his consent. The guardian holding the equalizer lowered it carefully until it hovered directly above Peter. The crystal at its center began to pulse with a rhythmic light. "Stand still," Gwen instructed, "and try to relax." A beam of golden light emerged from the equalizer, enveloping Peter. Immediately he felt a strange shifting in his perception, not painful, but profoundly disorienting. The world seemed to contract around him, or perhaps he expanded to meet it. Either way, when the light faded, the proportions had changed. Gwen and her people still appeared larger than human, but not impossibly so. Perhaps 7 or 8 feet tall rather than the milling-sized giants they'd seen moments before. Peter found he could now look up at their faces without craning his neck to uncomfortable extremes. "Bet?" Gwen asked, her voice now at a bearable pitch. Peter nodded, relief washing through him. "Much." The bearded elder stepped forward, stooping slightly to examine Peter more closely. "Remarkable." The equalizer accepted him immediately. "That suggests compatibility with our realm." His ancient eyes narrowed. "Or perhaps something more significant." Another elder, a stern-faced woman with silver hair coiled in elaborate braids, spoke up. "We should test him properly before jumping to conclusions, Elder Thorn. Many humans have crossed briefly in the past. Few have proven to be what we hoped. But none came bearing a guardian's bracelet," countered Elder Thorn, gesturing to Peter's wrist where the silver band continued to glow faintly. "And none arrived exactly when the signs aligned." Peter looked questioningly at Gwen, who seemed uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "The council has been expecting someone," she said carefully. "There's a prophecy, which we will discuss in proper time," interrupted the silver-haired elder. "For now, the human needs rest and acclamation. And you, Guardian Gwen, must explain why you acted without Runt of approval in granting him the bracelet." Gwen straightened, squaring her shoulders. "I made a field decision based on immediate need. A seeker broke through, Elder Mirror. It would have taken Peter regardless of my actions." Murmurs of alarm spread through the gathered crowd at the mention of the seeker. Elder Thorn raised his hands for silence. "These matters require full council deliberation. Guardian Gwen will report in detail, and the human will be given quarter to recover from crossing." His gaze settled on Peter with unsettling intensity. "Tomorrow, we will determine if he is indeed the bridge-walker of prophecy." Peter awoke to the sound of chiming crystals, the guest quarters he'd been given. A single room carved into what appeared to be a living tree, glowed with soft amber light from luminous fungi growing along the walls. Through the oval window he could see the twin moons had set, replaced by early morning light that cast the strange world in shades of gold and purple. Despite the scale equalizer's effects, his mind still struggled to process everything. The bed beneath him was sized for a guardian child, making it manageable for his human proportions, but the ceiling soared impossibly high, and the furniture remained oversized. A gentle knock preceded Gwen's entry. She wore formal attire now, a flowing robe of silvery material that shifted colors with her movements, and a circlet of woven metal that matched her guardian's bracelet. "The council is ready," she said without preamble. "Did you sleep well?" Peter nodded, though in truth, his dreams had been chaotic, filled with seekers and shadow shards, and endless falling. "What exactly does the council want from me?" "Your testimony, primarily," Gwen explained as she led him through winding corridors within the massive tree. "The appearance of a seeker is significant, especially one capable of physical crossing." They emerged onto a wide platform branching from the main trunk, overlooking a village unlike anything Peter could have imagined. Structures both grown and built intertwined with enormous trees, connected by graceful bridges and spiraling staircases. Guardians of various ages moved about their daily tasks below, some glancing up curiously at the human visitor. "Your home is beautiful," Peter admitted, momentarily forgetting his apprehension. "This is just one settlement," Gwen said, pride evident in her voice. "There are 7 major guardian villages, each protecting a primary crossing region." They crossed a suspension bridge to the largest structure, an airshell building resembling a massive seed pod, its exterior covered in the same luminous fungi that had lit Peter's quarters. Inside, the council awaited in a chamber arranged like an amphitheater, with 7 ornate chairs on a raised dais at its center. Elder Thorn and Elder Mirror occupied the 2 central seats, with 5 other elders, 3 women and 2 men, all bearing the unmistakable gravitas of great age, despite their seemingly youthful features. Completing the circle. "Approach, human," Elder Thorn commanded, his voice resonating through the chamber. Peter moved forward, acutely aware of the dozens of guardian observers seated in the surrounding tiers. Gwen remained at his side, a reassuring presence despite the formality of her bearing. "Before we begin," Elder Mirror said, "you should understand our methods." She gestured to a younger guardian who stepped forward bearing a transparent orb approximately the size of a human head. "This is a memory sphere," Gwen explained quietly. "It will allow the council to experience your encounter with the Seeker directly, rather than through your words alone." Peter eyed the sphere warily. "It reads minds?" "Not precisely," Elder Thorn interjected. "It captures emotional impressions and visual memories, but only those you consciously focus on. Your private thoughts remain your own." Still uncertain, Peter looked to Gwen, who nodded encouragingly. "It's standard procedure, and it will help your case." "My case?" Peter frowned. "Am I on trial here?" "Not a trial," Elder Mirror clarified, though her tone remained stern. but your arrival coincides with prophecies that have guided our people for generations. We must determine if this is mere coincidence or something more significant. The memory sphere was placed on a pedestal before Peter. Its surface swirled with faint colors, like oil on water. "Place your hands on either side," instructed the Guardian who had brought it. "Focus your thoughts on your encounter with Guardian Gwen and the Seeker. The sphere will do the rest." Taking a deep breath, Peter placed his palms against the cool surface of the orb. Immediately, warmth spread up his arms, and the sphere's interior clouded, then cleared to show vivid images. Peter discovering Gwen hanging from the tree, their conversation, the appearance of the Seeker, the desperate struggle, and finally, Peter closing the boundary using the stone. The council leaned forward, their expressions intent, as they watched the memories play out within the sphere. When the scene of the Seeker's banishment concluded, a collective murmur swept through the chamber. "The shadow shard," Elder Thorn said gravely. "It remained in the human world." Gwen stepped forward. "Yes, Elder, I secured it in my satchel." She produced the cloth-wrapped fragment, careful not to touch it directly. Elder Mira's eyes narrowed. "You brought it here, into our realm." "I judged it too dangerous to leave behind," Gwen replied steadily, "especially with the human boundary network already compromised." The memory sphere continued to replay Peter's recollection of receiving the Guardian's bracelet and their journey to the crossing point. When it showed his final glimpse of his world through the crossing mirror, the sphere dimmed and returned to transparency. "Remarkable," Elder Thorn murmured, stroking his long beard. "Not just that he closed a boundary on first attempt, but that he sensed it at all." His ancient eyes fixed on Peter with new intensity. "Tell me, human, what do you know of the Bridgewalker prophecy?" "I know nothing of your prophecies," Peter answered, honestly, meeting Elder Thorn's penetrating gaze. "Until yesterday, I didn't know your people existed." A ripple of whispers spread through the chamber. Elder Mira raised a hand for silence. "Bring forth the tapestry," she commanded. Two Guardian attendants departed, returning moments later carrying a large wooden frame between them. Suspended within it hung what appeared to be a woven tapestry of extraordinary complexity and beauty. As they positioned it before the council, Peter gasped involuntarily. The tapestry depicted two distinct worlds, one side showing landscapes reminiscent of his own Earth, with mountains, forests, and plains, the other showing the strange trees and purple skies of the Guardian realm. Between these worlds stood a small human figure, arms outstretched, with 1 foot in each realm. Golden threads ran throughout the weaving, and to Peter's astonishment, they appeared to move subtly, shifting the scene in nearly imperceptible ways. The prophecy tapestry was created 500 cycles ago, Elder Thorn explained, by our greatest seer, who glimpsed what she called the coming unraveling. It foretold a time when the boundaries between worlds would begin to fade. Elder Mira continued, "It speaks of the Bridgewalker, a human with the rare ability to sense and manipulate the boundaries, who would either help restore balance or hasten destruction." Peter stared at the human figure in the tapestry. Though the face was indistinct, something about the posture and form seemed uncomfortably familiar. "This doesn't prove anything," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "It could represent any human." "Perhaps," Elder Thorn conceded, "but consider the evidence. You heard Guardian Gwen when no others could. You successfully closed a boundary on your first attempt. The Guardian's bracelet accepted you without resistance, and the scale equalizer adapted to you instantly." His ancient eyes narrowed. "All unprecedented for a human visitor." "Coincidences," Elder Mira countered, though she seemed less certain than before. "We need more definitive proof before declaring this human the Bridgewalker." A younger council member, a woman with auburn hair and keen eyes, spoke for the first time. "There is a simple test. If he truly is the Bridgewalker, he should be able to see the pattern." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. "A fair proposal," Elder Sarah Thorn nodded. "Bring the tapestry closer." The attendants positioned the tapestry directly before Peter. From this distance, the golden threads were even more mesmerizing, their subtle movements creating an almost hypnotic effect. "Tell us what you see in the golden threads," Elder Sarah instructed, "not the images they form, but the threads themselves." Peter focused on the gleaming strands. At first, they appeared to be merely decorative elements, adding richness to the weaving. But as he concentrated, something strange happened. The threads seemed to separate from the background, floating slightly above the fabric's surface, connecting in patterns too complex to follow. "They're moving," he said slowly. "Not just shifting, but pulsing, like heartbeats or boundaries." He reached out instinctively, not quite touching the tapestry. "There are thousands of them, connecting everything. Some are bright and strong, others fading or broken." The chamber fell absolutely silent. Peter looked up to find every guardian staring at him with expressions ranging from awe to fear. "What?" he asked, suddenly self-conscious. "What did I say?" Elder Thorn exchanged significant glances with the other council members before answering. "The golden threads represent the boundaries between worlds, all worlds, not just ours and yours. They appear as simple decoration to most observers." His voice lowered. "Only a true bridgewalker can see their true nature and movement." Gwen stepped closer to Peter, her expression a mix of vindication and concern. "I told you there was a reason you heard me when others couldn't." Peter backed away from the tapestry, sudden understanding dawning. "You believe I'm this bridgewalker, that I'm meant to fix the boundaries between worlds?" He shook his head in disbelief. "I'm just a man, a starving Apache who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or perhaps," Elder Thorn suggested gently, "the right place at precisely the right time." Before Peter could respond, a commotion erupted at the chamber entrance. A young guardian burst in, breathing heavily from exertion. "Elders, forgive the interruption, but scouts report seeker activity at the eastern boundary. 3 crossing attempts in the past hour alone." Elder Mirror rose swiftly. "It seems the Shadow Shard's presence is already being felt. The Void Lords must sense it in our realm." Elder Thorn turned to Peter, his expression grave. "Prophecy or not, Bridgewalker or not, we face an immediate threat. The question now becomes, will you help us face it?" All eyes in the chamber turned to Peter, awaiting his answer. The silence stretched as Peter felt the weight of every guardian's expectation. A day ago, his only concern had been finding his next meal. Now somehow he stood at the center of a crisis, spanning multiple worlds. "I'll help," he said finally. "But not because of any prophecy. I'll help because that thing threatened both our worlds, and I've seen enough suffering to last several lifetimes." Relief visibly washed over Elder Thorn's ancient face. A worthy reason, regardless of prophecy. The chamber erupted into activity. Guardians moved with practiced efficiency, responding to commands from the council members. Elder Sarah approached Peter and Gwen. "Come," she said urgently, "to the strategic chamber. We must assess the situation." They followed her through winding corridors to a large circular room dominated by a round table. Above it hovered what appeared to be a miniature 3-dimensional map of glowing lines and points of light, a constellation of interconnected pathways suspended in mid-air. "The boundary map," Gwen explained, as Peter stared in wonder. "It shows every known crossing point between our world and yours, and their current status." Elder Sarah pressed her palm to the table's surface. The map responded instantly, zooming in on a section where several points pulsed an angry red. "These are the active breaches," she explained. "Eastern boundaries, just as reported. 3 attempted crossings." Her finger traced a line between the red points. "They're systematic, testing for weaknesses, not random attacks." Other council members filed in, gathering around the map. Elder Mirror studied the pattern with narrowed eyes. "Coordinated," she confirmed. "The Void Lords are directing them with purpose." Peter's Guardian's bracelet hummed against his wrist, responding to the proximity of the map. Following instinct, he extended his hand, toward the projection. The bracelet's glow intensified, and to everyone's surprise, new lines appeared on the map, fainter connections between points that hadn't been visible before. Secondary boundaries, Elder Thorn breathed. Theoretical crossings we've only speculated about. Elder Mira's skepticism visibly wavered. He's revealing pathways unknown to our scouts. Peter was as surprised as they were. I'm not doing anything intentional. The bracelet is responding somehow, because you see the pattern, Gwen said quietly. The true network, not just our documented crossings. A new red pulse appeared on the map, larger than the others, and expanding rapidly. That's not an attempt, Elder Sera said sharply. That's a successful breach. Sector 7, Willow Basin. How far from the village? Elder Thorn demanded. 2 leagues at most, another council member replied grimly. Elder Mira turned to a senior guardian standing nearby. Captain Loron, assemble a response team immediately. Priority is containment, then closure of the breach. The captain nodded and hurried from the room. I should go with them, Gwen said, stepping forward. I've faced a seeker directly. I know their capabilities. Too dangerous, Elder Mira countered. You're needed to protect the human. Peter, he interrupted. My name is Peter, not the human. And Gwen is right. If these seekers are anything like the one we encountered, your people need to know what they're facing. Elder Thorn studied Peter thoughtfully. And what of you? The Bridgewalker is central to their objectives. You would be their primary target. Peter looked at the boundary map, at the spreading red pulse that represented a direct threat to this world that had given him sanctuary. Then let me be a target, he said firmly. Draw them away from your people. Shocked murmurs rippled through the room. Absolutely not, Elder Mira declared. Prophecy or not, we cannot risk. It's not your decision, Peter cut in, surprising himself with his boldness. I've spent years alone, the last of my people. I know what it means to lose everything. His hand hovered over the pulsing breach on the map. I won't stand by while others suffer if I can help. Gwen placed her hand on his shoulder. Not alone, she said. We face this together. Elder Thorn exchanged glances with the other council members. The prophecy speaks of choice. The Bridgewalker must choose his path freely. He nodded solemnly. If Peter wishes to join the response team, we should honor that choice. Then it's settled, Elder Sera concluded. Guardian Gwen and Peter will accompany Captain Lauren's team to the Willow Basin breach. She turned to Peter. But you'll need more than courage to face what's coming. You'll need training, and quickly. As if on cue, the boundary map shifted again, revealing 3 more points beginning to pulse red in different sectors. We don't have time for traditional training, Elder Mira said, pragmatism overriding her reservations. Prepare the accelerator. Gwen inhaled sharply. Elder, the accelerator hasn't been used in generations. The risk is necessary. Elder Thorn finished. If Peter is indeed the Bridgewalker, the accelerator will help him access abilities that might otherwise take years to develop. His ancient eyes met Peter's, but the choice, again, must be his. What exactly is this accelerator? Peter asked, growing weary of being offered choices without full understanding. A dangerous gift, Gwen answered grimly, and possibly our only hope. The chamber they led Peter to lay deep beneath the council tree, accessible only by a spiraling staircase that descended far below the roots. Unlike the warm living spaces above, this room felt ancient and solemn, its walls lined with unadorned stone rather than living wood. At its center stood a raised dais supporting what appeared to be a crystalline crown, a circlet of clear, faceted stones connected by filaments of silver, so fine they seemed almost invisible. The crown hovered slightly above its pedestal, rotating slowly without any visible support. The mind accelerator, Elder Thorn said, his voice hushed with reverence, created in the early days when we first encountered the Void Lords, when we needed warriors trained in days rather than decades. Peter approached cautiously. It looks delicate. Its physical form belies its power, Elder Sera explained. The accelerator creates a direct mental link between teacher and student, allowing the transfer of knowledge, skills, and muscle memory almost instantaneously. If it's so effective, why haven't you used it in generations? Peter asked, noting Gwen's continued unease. Elder Mira's expression darkened. Because it exacts a heavy toll on both participants. The human mind, and even our guardian minds, aren't designed to absorb so much information so quickly. The process is painful. And there are risks. What kind of risks? Memory loss, personality changes, in rare cases, even physical trauma. Gwen said quietly, "The last time it was used, the teacher was comatose for a month afterward, and the student never fully recovered his sense of self." Peter took an instinctive step back from the device. "And you want me to use this now?" "Want? No," Elder Thorne sighed. "But need? Perhaps. The breaches are multiplying faster than we anticipated. Without accelerated training, your natural abilities, remarkable though they are, may not develop quickly enough to make a difference." Another guardian entered the chamber, a tall, silver-haired woman, with a warrior's bearing and eyes that seemed to hold centuries of experience, despite her youthful appearance. "This is Guardian Lyra," Elder Sarah introduced her. "Our master of boundaries and the only living guardian who has used the accelerator as a student many years ago." Lyra inclined her head slightly. "I've studied your memory sphere testimony, Peter of the Apache. Your instinctive understanding of boundary mechanics is unusual. With proper training, you could indeed become what the prophecy foretells. And you're volunteering to be my teacher," Peter guessed. "Despite the risks?" "I am," she confirmed without hesitation. "The Void Lords represent an existential threat to all world. If there's even a chance you are the Bridge Walker, the risk is warranted." Peter looked from Lyra to the hovering crown, then to Gwen, whose expression remained troubled. "What exactly would I learn?" "Centuries of boundary theory compressed into usable techniques," Lyra explained. "How to sense weaknesses, strengthen failing boundaries, create temporary crossings, and most critically, how to close breaches created by seekers. All in a matter of hours," Elder Mira added, "though your body and mind will experience it as weeks or months of intensive training." The gravity of the situation settled heavily on Peter's shoulders. The council chamber seemed impossibly distant now, as did the sun-baked plains of his own world. Events were moving with frightening speed, carrying him along like a leaf in a flash flood. "If I refuse?" he asked quietly. "Then we face the Seekers with conventional methods." Elder Thorne answered honestly. "We've held them at bay for millennia that way." But with boundaries failing across all sectors, simultaneously, he left the implication hanging. Gwen stepped forward. "Peter doesn't have to decide immediately. He should rest, consider." An attendant burst into the chamber, breathing heavily. "Elders, 3 more breaches confirmed. Seekers have reached the outer settlement in the eastern quadrant. There are casualties." The news landed like a physical blow. Elder Mira straightened, her previous skepticism replaced by grim determination. "We've run out of time for consideration." Peter looked again at the accelerator, its crystals now seeming to pulse in rhythm with his heart. He thought of his tribe, of the sickness and suffering he'd witnessed, of the emptiness that had followed. If the imbalance between worlds had contributed to that pain, "I'll do it," he said, the words coming before he'd fully formed the thought. "If it might help prevent more suffering in either world, I have to try." Relief and concern mingled on the faces around him. Lyra nodded solemnly and stepped onto the dais beside the accelerator. "The process requires absolute trust between teacher and student," she said, her voice taking on a formal cadence. "I must open my mind completely to you, and you to me. Are you prepared for such intimacy with a stranger?" Peter swallowed hard but nodded. "I've nothing left to hide and nothing left to lose." "That," Lyra said, with unexpected gentleness, "is where you're wrong, but we shall proceed nonetheless." She gestured for him to join her on the dais. As Peter stepped up, the accelerator's rotation increased, the crystals glowing brighter in response to his presence. "Remember," Gwen called to him, "regardless of what the accelerator shows you, remember who you are." The crystalline crown descended slowly toward them, its light enveloping both Peter and Lyra in a cocoon of radiance. Pain like nothing Peter had ever experienced engulfed him as the accelerator activated. His mind filled with images, sensations, and knowledge, pouring in faster than he could process. Centuries of guardian wisdom crashed through his consciousness like a raging river, threatening to wash away his very identity. Somewhere distant, he heard himself screaming. Then, suddenly, structure emerged from chaos. Lyra's presence manifested within the tumult, a steady anchor around which the flood of information began to organize itself. Her consciousness guided his, sorting and categorizing the torrent of knowledge into comprehensible patterns. Focus, her voice commanded within his mind. See the boundaries as they truly are. The maelstrom of information coalesced into a single image, a vast, intricate web of golden lines identical to those he'd seen in the prophecy tapestry, but now extending infinitely in all directions. Each intersection represented a crossing point between worlds, each strand a boundary that maintained separation and balance. This is the pattern, Lyra explained. What most guardians spend lifetimes learning to glimpse, you see naturally. Now you must learn to affect it. The lesson continued at breakneck speed. Peter experienced centuries of guardian trial and error compressed into what felt like months, though some distant part of him realized only minutes were passing in the physical world. He learned to recognize boundary types, to sense their strength or weakness, to identify natural crossing points and artificial breaches. Through Lyra's memories, he experienced the first Seeker invasion, hundreds of years ago, felt the terror and determination of early guardians as they developed techniques to repel the Void Lord's servants. He witnessed the creation of the first boundary tools devices that amplified a guardian's natural abilities. The most important of these appeared in his mind's eye, a silver instrument resembling a writing stylus, its tip glowing with the same golden light as the boundaries themselves. The boundary stylus, Lyra's voice explained, our most fundamental tool. In the hands of a trained guardian or a bridgewalker, it can temporarily repair weakened boundaries or even create new crossings when necessary. Peter absorbed the knowledge of how to use it. The precise movements, the mental focus required, the dangers of improper application. Through Lyra's shared experience, his hands learned patterns they had never physically performed, his mind grasping concepts no human had ever been taught. As suddenly as it had begun, the accelerator's light dimmed. Peter collapsed to his knees on the dais, gasping for breath. His entire body trembled with exhaustion, his mind reeling from the experience. Beside him, Lyra swayed dangerously before Elder Sarah rushed forward to support her. Did it work? Elder Thorne asked anxiously. Peter couldn't speak yet, his throat raw from screaming, but in his mind, the pattern remained, not overwhelming now, but present, like a map he could reference at will. He understood things that should have taken decades to learn. Lyra, pale but conscious, nodded weakly. It absorbed more than I expected, a natural aptitude. She reached into a pouch at her belt with shaking hands and withdrew a silver object, the boundary stylus he had just learned about in the mental training. This belongs with you now, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Use it wisely. Peter accepted the stylus, feeling its weight in his palm, heavier than it looked, with a subtle vibration that resonated with his guardian's bracelet. Can you stand? Gwen asked, approaching cautiously. Peter nodded and rose unsteadily to his feet. The room spun briefly, then stabilized. Despite the physical exhaustion, his mind felt strangely clear, expanded somehow. The breaches, he asked, surprised by the hoarseness of his voice. Worsening, Elder Mirror reported grimly. Captain Lauren's team is assembled and waiting. They've been holding for your training to complete. I'm ready, Peter said, though he wasn't entirely sure it was true. The knowledge was there, implanted by the accelerator, but his body still felt the strain of the process. Lyra gripped his arm with surprising strength for her weakened state. Remember, the stylus is an extension of your will. It doesn't create power. It focuses what already exists within you. Elder Thorn stepped forward. Guardian Lyre needs immediate medical attention. The rest of you must join Captain Lauren. The Eastern Quadrant breach is our priority. It's the largest and most stable, suggesting the Seekers are establishing a foothold there. As they hurried from the chamber, Peter clutched the boundary stylus tightly. Among the flood of implanted memories and knowledge, one image stood out with terrifying clarity. Lyra's recollection of a world where the Seekers had successfully established a permanent crossing, a once vibrant realm, reduced to a shadowy wasteland, where neither light nor life could flourish. "It won't happen here," he murmured, as much to himself as to anyone. "Not to either of our worlds." Beside him, Gwen nodded grimly. "The Willow Basin is a half-day's journey east. If we hurry, we might reach it before nightfall." "And if the Seekers are already there?" Peter asked. Her expression hardened. "Then we'll see if the prophecy speaks true." Captain Lauren's response team moved with practiced efficiency through the forest. 8 guardians, including Gwen, each equipped with boundary tools and light armor fashioned from materials. Peter couldn't identify metals that seemed to flow like liquid, yet held their shape, fabrics that shimmered with protective enchantments. Peter rode with Gwen on a creature that resembled a horse, but with iridescent scales instead of hair and 6 legs that moved with uncanny silence through the underbrush. Despite the scale equalizer's effects, he felt small and vulnerable among these warriors. "How are you feeling?" Gwen asked, as they navigated a particularly dense section of forest. "Strange," Peter admitted. "My head is full of knowledge that doesn't feel like mine. I understand concepts I've never studied, remember experiences I never had." "The accelerator's effects will settle with time," she assured him. "The foreign memories will fade, but the skills and knowledge will remain." Captain Lauren, riding at the front of the forum, raised her hand for a halt. She was an imposing figure, taller than most guardians, with close-cropped silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. From her belt she unhooked a device resembling a compass and held it flat on her palm. "The Void Tracker," Gwen whispered to Peter. "It detects Seeker presence and void energy." The tracker's needle spun rapidly before settling on a direction eastward. As they watched, the metal housing began to glow with a faint red light. "They're close," Captain Lauren announced grimly. "The tracker's heating up." She passed the device to Peter, who felt its warmth against his palm. Through his newly acquired knowledge, he understood its function. The needle responded to the unique energy signature of void entities, growing warmer as they drew nearer. "Can you sense anything?" Lauren asked him directly, her tone professional but skeptical. Peter closed his eyes, focusing on the Guardian's bracelet at his wrist and the pattern he could now perceive more clearly, thanks to Lyra's training. The golden web of boundaries appeared in his mind, and he immediately spotted the disruption, a tear in the fabric of reality approximately a mile ahead, bleeding darkness into the Guardian realm. "The breach is larger than we thought," he reported, opening his eyes. "And it's stabilizing. The edges are hardening, becoming permanent." Captain Lauren's expression darkened. "Exactly what we feared. They're establishing a foothold." She addressed the team. "We proceed on foot from here. Stealth is essential." As they dismounted, one of the Guardians distributed small crystal vials containing a luminous blue liquid. "Boundary essence," Gwen explained, handing one to Peter. "It temporarily enhances our natural abilities. We only use it in emergencies." "Is this an emergency?" Peter asked, eyeing the vial warily. "A stable breach in our realm." "Yes, this qualifies." Gwen tucked her vial into a secure pocket. "Save it for when we reach the breach. You'll know when it's needed." They advanced cautiously through increasingly twisted vegetation. Peter noticed the changes in their surroundings, plants that appeared withered or strangely altered, colors leaching from the landscape, the air growing colder with each step. The void tracker in Captain Lauren's hand now glowed an angry red, almost too hot to hold. From ahead came sounds that raised the hair on Peter's neck. Inhuman chittering and scraping, the crackle of energy, and underneath it all, a low, pulsing hum, that seemed to vibrate in his bones. They crested a small rise and looked down into the willow basin, or what remained of it. The once beautiful valley had transformed into a nightmarish landscape. At its center gaped a tear in reality itself, a vertical slash of absolute darkness, roughly the height of 3 guardians. Around it moved shapes similar to the seeker Peter had encountered, but smaller and more numerous, scuttling on too many limbs. Most disturbing was the spreading corruption emanating from the breach, a creeping darkness that transformed everything it touched. Trees twisted into tortured shapes, the ground blackened and cracked, the very air seemed to warp around the rift. "Void corruption," Captain Luren whispered. "It's happening faster than we've ever seen." One of the guardians, a young man with a face that betrayed his fear despite his training, pointed to the far side of the valley. The settlement, through the twisted landscape, Peter could just make out structures, guardian dwellings now dark and still, no movement, no signs of life. "We're too late for them," Captain Luren said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Our priority now is closing that breach before the corruption spreads further." Peter's hand moved to the boundary stylus at his belt, the knowledge from the accelerator surfacing in his mind. "I can close it," he said with more confidence than he felt, "but I'll need to get closer, and those seekers will sense me the moment I try." "That's why we're here," Luren replied, unsheathing a weapon that glowed with the same golden light as the boundaries themselves. "We'll create a diversion, draw them away from the breach." Her eyes locked with Peter's. "You and Guardian Gwen will have one chance to reach it and seal it." The void tracker in her hand now burned so hot she was forced to drop it to the ground, where it continued to pulse with warning. "They know we're here," Gwen said, her voice hushed. "They can sense us just as we sense them." As if in confirmation, the chittering below suddenly ceased. Dozens of inhuman heads turned in unison, looking directly toward their position. With glowing vertical slit eyes, Peter drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of 2 worlds on his shoulders. "Tell me what to do." "Diversionary team, left flank," Captain Luren commanded, her voice barely above a whisper yet carrying unmistakable authority. "Suppression team, right. Guardian Gwen and the bridge walker, follow the center path once we engage." The Guardians moved with fluid precision, separating into their assigned groups. One of them handed Peter a small metallic cylinder. "What's this?" he asked, turning the object in his palm. "Emergency measure," the Guardian replied grimly. "Activation phrase is illuminate. Use only if surrounded." Before Peter could ask for clarification, Captain Luren raised her hand and then dropped it in a sharp gesture. The signal to move, the Guardian teams surged forward from the ridge, weapons materializing in their hands. Peter watched in awe as crystalline structures extended from simple hilts, forming blades of pure golden light, the same energy he now recognized as boundary essence. "Light blades," Gwen explained, drawing her own. The weapon hummed with power, casting her face in an ethereal glow. "They disrupt a seeker's connection to the void, not fatal, but incapacitating." The effect was immediate. The seekers below shrieked in unified alarm, their misshapen bodies scrambling to meet the threat. They moved with disturbing speed, scuttling on multiple limbs across the corrupted ground. Now, Gwen pulled Peter forward. While they're distracted, they raced down the slope, using the chaos of the battle as cover. Guardian light blades flashed against seeker talons, golden light against void black shadows. The clashing energies sent shockwaves through the air that Peter could feel against his skin. Halfway to the breach, a seeker spotted them. Smaller than the one Peter had encountered in his world, but no less menacing, it broke away from the main battle and charged directly toward them, its vertical slit eyes fixed on Peter. Gwen stepped forward, light blade raised. "Keep going," she shouted to Peter. "I'll handle this one." Peter hesitated only briefly before continuing toward the breach. The tear in reality loomed larger as he approached, a vertical gash of absolute darkness that seemed to devour the light around it. The corrupting influence was worse up close, the air itself feeling thick and wrong in his lungs. His guardian's bracelet vibrated violently against his wrist, responding to the proximity of such a massive boundary violation. The boundary stylus at his belt grew warm, almost eager to be used. 20 feet from the breach, 2 more seekers detached from the shadows, blocking his path. These were different, larger, with more humanoid features, as though they'd begun to adapt to this world. They carried weapons of their own, cruel hooks and blades that seemed to be extensions of their limbs rather than separate tools. Peter reached for the boundary stylus, but before he could draw it, the seekers attacked in perfect coordination, one high, one low. He dodged the first blow, but the second caught him across the leg, tearing through the guardian fabric and into flesh beneath. Pain flared hot and immediate. The implanted training from the accelerator took over. Peter's body moved without conscious thought, executing defensive maneuvers Lyra had embedded in his muscle memory. He ducked another swing, rolled beneath a third, and came up with the metallic cylinder the Guardian had given him clutched in his hand. "Illuminate," he gasped. The cylinder expanded instantly, transforming into a light blade of his own, smaller than the Guardian's weapons, but pulsing with the same golden energy. The nearest seeker recoiled instinctively from the light. Peter swung the blade awkwardly, lacking the Guardian's lifetime of training despite Lyra's accelerated lessons. But what he lacked in skill, he made up for in determination. The light blade connected with the seeker's arm, slicing through shadowy matter. The creature shrieked, its severed limb dissolving into wisps of darkness. The second seeker circled more cautiously now, evaluating this unexpected resistance. In the momentary reprieve, Peter glanced toward the main battle. The Guardians were holding their own, but more seekers continued to emerge from the breach. This wasn't a simple incursion, it was an invasion force. "Close it," Gwen shouted, battling her way toward him. "Use the stylus now." Peter turned back to the breach, calculating the distance. Too far still, the stylus required close proximity to effect such a large tear. He would need to get past the remaining seeker. As if reading his thoughts, the creature lunged forward. Peter parried with the light blade, the collision of energies sending painful vibrations up his arm. His human strength, even enhanced by the Guardian tools, was no match for the seeker's raw power. The vial of boundary essence pressed against his chest from the inner pocket where he'd stored it. Lyra's implanted knowledge warned of its side effects. Strain on an unprepared body, potential lasting damage to a human physiology never designed to channel such energies. But as the seeker pressed its advantage, forcing Peter back step by step away from the breach, he realized he had no choice. With his free hand, he pulled out the vial, and in one fluid motion, uncorked it with his teeth and swallowed the glowing blue liquid. Power surged through him like lightning, simultaneously exhilarating and excruciating. The pattern exploded into vivid clarity in his mind, every boundary and connection blindingly apparent. The light blade in his hand flared brighter, responding to the sudden influx of energy. "For both worlds," Peter whispered, and charged toward the breach. The boundary essence transformed Peter's perception. Time seemed to slow, the chaotic battlefield resolving into patterns of movement and energy he could track and predict. The seeker before him telegraphed its attacks in ways now obvious to his enhanced senses. With newfound precision, Peter feinted left, then ducked right as the creature overcommitted. The light blade flashed, connecting with the seeker's midsection. The creature convulsed as golden energy disrupted its form, collapsing into dissipating shadows. The path to the breach lay open. Peter sprinted forward, ignoring the burning pain in his wounded leg. The tear in reality towered above him, a vertical slash of absolute darkness, framed by corrupted, withering vegetation. The closer he got, the more wrong it felt, an abomination in the natural order that his every instinct screamed to seal. 5 feet from the breach, Peter skidded to a halt. Protruding from the ground directly before the dark opening was an object he hadn't noticed from a distance. a foot-long spike of jagged obsidian, its surface etched with symbols that hurt his eyes to look at directly. The spike pulsed with malevolent energy, tendrils of darkness flowing from it to the edges of the breach. Peter recognized it instantly from Lyra's implanted knowledge, a void anchor, used by seekers to stabilize their crossings and prevent natural boundary repair. As long as it remained in place, the breach couldn't be closed. He reached for it, then jerked his hand back as scorching pain lanced up his arm. The anchor radiated a defensive field that repelled any guardian energy, including the boundary essence now flowing through his system. The anchor must be removed, he shouted toward Gwen, who was fighting her way toward him through a knot of smaller seekers. I can't touch it. Use the stylus, she called back, her light blade cutting a swath through shadowy forms, create a counter field. Peter drew the boundary stylus from his belt. The silver instrument hummed with potential in his hand, resonating with both his guardian's bracelet and the boundary essence in his blood. Following instinct and implanted training, he traced a complex pattern in the air around the void anchor, golden light trailing from the stylus's tip. The symbols hung suspended for a moment, then contracted around the obsidian spike. There was a sound like glass shattering as the anchor's defensive field collapsed. Peter lunged forward and grasped the spike. Cold like he'd never experienced shot up his arm, not the cold of ice or winter, but the absolute cold of infinite voice. His very thoughts seemed to crystallize, memories freezing and cracking at the edges of his consciousness. Only the boundary essence's protection prevented his mind from shattering completely. With a cry that was equal parts pain and defiance, Peter wrenched the anchor from the ground. The effect was immediate. The breach's edges began to fluctuate, its perfect oval shape distorting as natural boundary forces reasserted themselves. The remaining seekers shrieked in unified alarm. Those still engaged with the Guardians broke off their attacks and scrambled toward Peter and the breach. They recognized the existential threat to their foothold. Now Peter, Captain Loran shouted from across the battlefield. Seal it before more come through. Peter dropped the void anchor and raised the boundary stylus. The knowledge flowed through him, the precise movements required, the focus of will, the channeling of boundary energy. He began tracing the sealing pattern in the air before the breach, golden light flowing from the stylus in complex, interconnected symbols. A massive shadow loomed within the breach itself, something far larger than the seekers they'd faced, pushing against the thinning barrier between worlds. Two enormous clawed hands gripped the edges of reality itself, tearing the opening wider even as Peter fought to close it. Void Lord Gwen gasped, reaching Peter's side at last. Her armor was scorched and torn, golden blood seeping from multiple wounds. They've never come through directly before. The entity within the breach let out a sound that was felt rather than heard, a subsonic rumble that shook the ground and rattled Peter's bones. The golden symbols he'd traced wavered, disrupted by the Void Lord's power. I can't hold it, Peter gritted through clenched teeth, blood trickling from his nose with the strain of channeling so much boundary energy through his human form. It's too strong. Gwen placed her hand over his on the style. Together, she said, her own boundary energy flowing into the tool and strengthening the sealing pattern. One by one, the remaining Guardians disengaged from their battles and formed a circle around Peter and Gwen. Each placed a hand on the shoulder of the person before them, creating an unbroken circuit of power that flowed ultimately into the boundary stylus. The golden symbols blazed brighter, stabilizing and expanding. The Void Lord roared in fury, pushing harder against the closing breach. For a moment the outcome hung in perfect balance. Guardian light against void darkness, creation against dissolution. Then Peter remembered the pattern, the interconnected web of all boundaries across all worlds. In his mind's eye, he reached beyond the local breach, drawing on the strength of the entire network. The Guardian's bracelet at his wrist flared with blinding light, responding to his unprecedented connection to the pattern. For both our worlds, he whispered again, and pushed. The breach collapsed inward with a thunderous implosion, cutting off the Void Lord's roar mid-sound. A shockwave of golden energy exploded outward, washing over the battlefield and disintegrating the remaining Seekers like shadows before dawn. Then silence fell over the Willow Basin, broken only by the labored breathing of the surviving Guardians. Peter swayed on his feet, the stylus slipping from his suddenly nerveless fingers. The last thing he saw before consciousness fled was Gwen's face, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. "Bridgewalker," she whispered, catching him as he fell. Peter awoke to sunlight filtering through familiar leaves, the massive trees of the Guardian village. He lay in a healing chamber, its walls alive with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. His body felt simultaneously lighter than air and heavier than stone, the aftermath of channeling boundary energy far beyond human limit. 3 days, came Gwen's voice from beside him. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. He turned his head with effort to find her seated at his bedside. She looked weary but whole, her wounds from the battle healed to faint silver lines. "The breach?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp. "Sealed completely," she confirmed, "and not just that one. All active breaches across our realm closed simultaneously when you connected to the pattern." The Seekers were driven back to the void. Peter tried to sit up but found his limbs uncooperative. "The Void Lord banished, but not destroyed," Gwen replied grimly. "Such entities cannot be truly killed, only repelled. But you've bought both our worlds time, perhaps generations of it." Memory flooded back. The desperate battle, the united circle of Guardians, the moment when he'd reached beyond the local breach to draw upon the entire pattern. "I did something impossible, didn't I? According to every text and teaching, yes." Elder Thorn's voice came from the doorway as the ancient Guardian entered, leaning slightly on a staff of white wood. "No single Guardian has ever directly manipulated the entire pattern. Many believed it couldn't be done." "The prophecy," Peter murmured, "has been fulfilled." Elder Thorn nodded solemnly. "You are indeed the Bridgewalker, Peter of the Apache. Though perhaps Pattern Walker would be more accurate now," added Elder Mirror, following Thorn into the chamber. Her previous skepticism had vanished, replaced by something like cautious respect. She approached Peter's bedside, holding a small object in her palm, a perfectly round stone divided precisely in half, one side obsidian black and the other crystalline white. "The balance stone," she explained, "our most sacred artifact, created at the founding of the Guardian Order. For centuries it has been dormant, its energies in perfect equilibrium." She held it closer for Peter to see. "Until you closed the breach." The stone was rotating slowly above Elder Mirror's palm, the black and white halves shifting subtly, realigning themselves. "It represents the balance between all realms," Elder Thorn explained. "When you connected to the pattern, you didn't just close breaches, you began to heal the fundamental imbalance that has been growing for generations." "Is that why I could hear Gwen when no one else could?" Peter asked. "Why I could see the boundaries?" "You were born with the potential," Gwen said gently. "The drought in your world, the sickness that took your tribe, these were symptoms of the imbalance. Your suffering opened you to hearing across boundaries." The balance stone pulsed once with golden light, the same energy Peter now recognized as the essence of boundaries themselves. "The Council has reached a decision," Elder Mirror stated formally. "You will be offered full training as a Guardian, the first human to receive such an honor. Your unique abilities make you invaluable to both our worlds." Peter looked from Elder Mirror to Elder Thorn to Gwen, then back to the balance stone. In its divided surface, he saw a reflection of his own divided existence. Part of him still connected to his human world, another part now irrevocably tied to the Guardian realm and the pattern that connected all things. "And if I wish to return to my world?" he asked quietly. "That remains your right," Elder Thorn assured him. "Though the imbalance is temporarily stabilized, the Void Lords will eventually find new ways to breach our defenses. Both worlds would benefit from your continued involvement, but the choice must be yours," Gwen added firmly, "as it has been from the beginning." Peter closed his eyes, reaching out with his newfound senses. He could still perceive the pattern fainter now without the boundary essence enhancing his abilities, but present nonetheless. Within it he felt the connections between his world and this one, countless delicate strands maintaining separation yet ensuring balance. He thought of his empty existence before finding Gwen, of the barren plains and lonely night. Then he considered what he'd experienced here: purpose, connection, belonging. Yet there was also responsibility in remaining, a burden he wasn't sure he was prepared to carry indefinitely. "I need time," he said finally, "to heal, to think." Elder Thorne nodded understanding. "Of course, rest and recover your strength. The boundary you sealed at the Willow Basin will remain stable for some time." As the elders departed, Gwen remained at his bedside. The balance stone had been left on a small table nearby, still slowly rotating, black and white in perfect harmony. "Whatever you decide," she said softly, "you've already changed both our worlds for the better." Peter reached out with effort and touched the Guardian's bracelet, still encircling his wrist, his first connection to this strange new existence. "Perhaps," he replied, "that's enough for now." Outside the healing chamber's window, the twin moons of the Guardian realm had risen, casting their gentle light across a landscape no longer threatened by immediate destruction. In the distance where the Willow Basin lay, Peter could just make out the first signs of renewal, corrupted ground beginning to heal, new growth emerging, balance, slowly but surely, being restored.